Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right. Okay, so let's come to very most awaited guest lecture. This is the first in series guest lecture on behalf of Tax Guild, my partner Seema, the academic board, Rohan and Ajay. I'm delighted to welcome Mrs. Shobhan Kar, uh, a former revenue services officer, a friend, a colleague, difficult to describe. More importantly, it's even difficult to read out his resume. And when I say difficult, means I would say interesting to read out his resume. After reading it, I could only conclude that he's an extremely multifaceted personality. After completing his master's in arts and that too in international relations and affairs from JNU, also Jawaharlal University, he went for his civil services exam. He was in the civil services for almost over a decade and took a premature retirement in December 2020 for reasons that he knows better than anyone else. But it's clearly a loss for the government to be able to lose out on in my view is amongst the finest civil servants and IRS officers. He's got an interesting background in both academics and in extracurricular, but more importantly at a competitive level. He played cricket and won trophies for under 16 Vijay Merchant Trophy and under 19 Coach Behar Trophy. He was a junior and played for Orissa and the Eastern region. He runs and funds self-funded NGO called Cheshta. More importantly, coming back to his background in the revenue services, he's played an instrumental role with a good blend of experience at the field level, at the policy level. He was under secretary at a deputy commissioner level and for over 4 budgets. And as the deputy secretary and director level, which is the additional commissioner level, he has been a part of diverse engagements and represented India on many of its positions in multilateral forums. A special mention about his contribution to the bilateral APA program would do tremendous injustice to his background and experience. I guess we have him here as someone who has been supportive of academic initiatives taken by organizations such as Tax Guild. More recently, in 2019, he was promoted as a commissioner, and thereafter he retired he took a premature retirement within a year or so. So over to you, Mr. Kar. I'm delighted extremely to welcome you for this first in series for the guest lecture.
Thank you, Mukeshji, for your very, very kind words. 23 years in the bureaucracy. It was a long time. And thanks to the Tax Guild, I'm very privileged to be here to give a guest lecture. Actually, I would put it this way. I have not come here to tell the young minds who have joined us anything new about transfer pricing or get into the technicalities or legalistic aspects. I'm sure they'll do a better job than we did. I would just try to, run through the history of transfer pricing, the journey that transfer pricing has taken in India. But before that, a caveat. Mukeshji has recently come out with a magnum opus on TP. So, sitting in front of him and trying to recollect my thoughts. This is an extempore lecture. I don't normally prepare for these lectures. So, speaking in front of him, I would surely request him to correct me at some places, and I would also learn something from this lecture, because every time one speaks, one learns.
That's not fair, sir. You're being extremely modest, unnecessary.
Okay, so I thought the primary audience were some young chartered accountants. So I hope they have joined us here today. So let me begin by saying to the young colleagues, and also some experienced colleagues have joined here. They don't need any introduction or learning from me. So as a concept, transfer price is a very old concept in economic theory. So whenever there's a group doing business anywhere in the world, and when that group tries to accurately reflect the transactions within the group, related party as we call them, or intra-group as we call them, they need to set a price to transactions, even if it is not required, because any group can always consolidate its profits and report its income and pay its taxes. But transfer price is an economic mechanism where each entity within the group is seen as a separate entity, and their own profits and losses can be fairly determined on the basis of the transfer price. Why does it become important for taxation? Because it is felt that intra-group transactions have a scope to adjust the prices in a manner, or let me use a rather strong word, manipulate the prices within the group so as to take advantage of different regimes, different countries having different tax rates. So for example, in a tax haven, or where there are hardly any taxes, somebody could report a very high level of profit through the mechanism of a transfer price. And that is why a tax administration should have something similar to transfer pricing regulations, so as to be able to determine correct profitability of the entity operating within its country. This is the basic philosophy which brings in transfer pricing regulations into the tax code. Now, I was talking about Mukesh Ji's book. It talks about 20 years of transfer pricing in India. For those of you who already know, this legislation was introduced in budget 2001 by the then finance minister, and it took effect from assessment year 2002-03. I remember as a young assistant commissioner, suddenly we were asked to refer cases to the TPO. I mean, we really didn't know what we were supposed to do. Who is a TPO? What is to be referred? And then I remember my additional commissioner saying, no, you have to look at these parameters. Transactions should be of X value. The international transaction audit report is such and such. We were basically guided and coached by our seniors, mentoring as you call it. So assessment year 2002-03 was the beginning of transfer pricing regulations being put into practice in India. Now, if we look at the 20 years we have so far, I would divide it into 3 phases. Phase 1 would be the first 3 years. I call that a very benign state. Just as if I take the analogy from cricket, as that happens to be one of my forte. When you go to a cricket pitch and on a new pitch you have to play, everybody is circumspect, the batting side and the bowling side. So when transfer pricing opened up in India, as officers in the department, we really did not know what is expected of us. How do we handle these transactions? How to evaluate their pricing mechanisms? I'm sure on the other side, Mukesh Ji is a very experienced tax practitioner. They would have thought how Indian revenue is going to look at our transactions. How do we justify that our transactions are at arm's length? So that was the beginning, and I call the first 3 years to be benign, because what happened in the first 3 years, everybody was learning the basics of transfer pricing on both sides, and what documentation to be prepared, how to comply with the regulations. And what the government of India at that time did was, it issued a few instructions, and one of them was instruction number 3 of 2003. The idea behind the instruction was that we must explain how the law is to be implemented. Our officers should know what to look out for specifically, not go wrong while evaluating transfer. And there was another instruction, I don't recollect the number, perhaps it was 14 of 2001, that clearly said that the idea is not to make adjustments left, right, and center. And if we feel that the taxpayer's arm's length price falls within a certain parameter, we may as well accept that price to be at arm's length without getting into making adjustments. So the first couple of years, first 3 years, I would specify that as the beginning, the rollout of the TP regime, both sides trying to learn the tricks of the trade. And so I call that a benign state of affairs. The next 10 years, let us say from sometime in 2008 or 9, when assessment years 6, 7, 7, 8 were being picked up for audit. And I think that continued for 10 years, if I'm not wrong, where the Indian TPO started to flex their muscles. I'm not saying that in a pejorative sense. They had learned transfer pricing. They knew that multinationals did manage their pricing in a manner where there could be, loss of revenue to India. So while they looked at those same traditional models of which methods to apply, what documents to ask for, I felt that that was a phase of aggression on the part of our TPOs, and throughout the world, Indian tax authority tax regime, especially in the transfer pricing, was seen as a regime that was very aggressive on TP issues. Lots of adjustments were made, huge adjustments were made, which were carried into litigation. Every second case, and in fact, if my data is right, we almost audited 5,000 cases a year and ended up making more than 2,000, 2,500 adjustments. So the strike rate was about 50%. And some of the adjustments were massive, quite massive. And that sent out a signal to the outside world that Indian TPOs perhaps do not understand the business realities. Maybe they're going overboard at making adjustments. And this was not the way a transfer pricing regime should be run. Now, since all of you are young CAs, you would be reading the sections, chapter 10C, 12C, 92 to 90F, all those sections you would read and know the law. But I would request all of you to look at instruction number 3 of 2016. This instruction actually took over the old instruction number 3. It's a coincidence that both are numbered instruction 3. Instruction 3 of 2016 actually, the law has not been amended, but it has done several things which has an impact of almost bringing in legislation into the act. I'll give you one example. Instruction 3 of 2016 completely prohibits the transfer pricing, the assessing officer from making any TP adjustments. I remember when I was an AO, I was asked to do a TP adjustment or do a TP audit. And I used to go to the TPO to learn what I'm supposed to see in the file, what questions should I ask, because I was never trained to be a TPO till 2012. So what instruction 3 of 2016 says, though the law doesn't say this, it says that assessing officers cannot do any transfer pricing adjustments. Either they refer it to the TPO, or if they do not refer, they will not look at these issues. They will leave an office note in the assessment order saying that we have not examined the TP issues by virtue of the board's instruction. Why was that? Because you see, tomorrow, if there's a case of reopening something, unless the AO writes this, somebody can challenge the reopening itself, saying that all these issues have been carefully examined. So this is one example where instruction 3 the board has tried to make changes in the implementation of the TP regulations without actually amending the provisions of the act. We'll revisit the instruction again. So the second phase, I would name the second phase as a phase of aggression and disputes. Huge additions, lots of litigation, cases going everywhere, to the CIT appeal, to the DRP, the ITAT. And this 10 years actually tried the patience of foreign investors and taxpayers, and the CBDT was getting that constant feedback. So if you see, as early as 2009, the CBDT and the government tried to alter their attention towards dispute resolution. And two significant things happened around 2009-10. One was the introduction of the safe harbor regime in the law, and the other was the setting up of a dispute resolution panel. Now, the DRP was supposed to be the panacea for all ills, all disputes that taxpayers faced. 3 senior commissioners looking at the draft assessment order and giving their verdict. Unfortunately, after 10 years, and ironically, my last posting was as CIT DRP, I can say without any hesitation that the DRP as an institution has not worked for various reasons. I would not elaborate on that. The DRP has at least not worked in resolving disputes. So you have 3 commissioners sitting, giving you long hearings. Ultimately, the orders are usually, confirming the TPO's actions. So that doesn't make any sense to me. Now, the safe harbor regime, though was brought into the law in 2009, the rules came much later. There was perhaps somewhere in the hierarchy, somewhere in the government, a thinking that we need to use transfer pricing as a tool to set right all the manipulations being done by the multinational enterprises. I thought that was a very wrong approach. There should not be an adversarial relationship between tax authorities and taxpayers, especially these huge multinational companies. What was required was better understanding of their business models, their transfer pricing methods, and only in very specific and limited cases where we had an open and shut case of manipulations or transfer pricing being used as a tool to divert profits from India to other regimes. Those were the cases that actually needed our attention. Unfortunately, we spread our net very wide. As I told you, 5,000 audits a year, not a joke. Every TPO doing 100 to 200 cases. So you can well imagine the pressures under which they were working. And with time barring pressures, some of the cases perhaps did not get the attention they deserved to get, ended up in making huge adjustments, which was not a good thing for either side. So phase 2, I would say, continued for 10 years. Out of 20, first 3 was a benign state, and the next 10 years was perhaps a state of aggression, adjustments, litigation, disputes, misunderstandings, and perhaps an image of India trying to garner revenue under the guise of implementing transfer pricing regulations. I think the watershed year, for me at least, and I let me tell you right at this point, I do have a bias for the APA program because I have been associated with it from day one. So I think the third phase almost perfectly coincides with the APA regime in India. 2013-14 financial year was the first financial year of APA. The law had come into place in 2012. The rules came a little late. And over the last 7-8 years, the APA regime in India has received a tremendous response from taxpayers. I think more than 1,300 or 1,400 applications. I don't have the data anymore with me since I've left the government, but at least 1,300 to 1,400 applications, a huge number. I mean, why would taxpayers come in large numbers to the APA program? There was something good about this program. And I think 2-3 things were good about it. I think for the first time, taxpayers and tax practitioners found people or found the department to be listening. You know, it was not a one-way communication where a show cause notice was hurled at you. You may give whatever replies, and addition is coming at you. It was not that. People sat for hours together discussing why you did this, why your method is cost plus, why is it not profit split, what are your business plans, how do you do your global transfer pricing. So various things were discussed and debated. And I'm not saying that we agreed on everything. I still feel getting an APA in India is it's not a very easy job. And the last 2-3 years have been bad, primarily because of COVID. But there could be other reasons also. Things have slowed down. I'm getting feedback from tax practitioners that APAs are not moving. But I think the initial 4-5 years were really good. People found tax officers to be receptive. Tax officers wanted to make the APA regime a success. So they also turned out in their best, best soft skills and best diplomacy was used to make the taxpayer feel at home, that we are friends, not targeting each other here, trying to understand you better and giving you a solution which will take you away from the rigmarole of CIT appeal, DRP, ITAT, and even high courts and Supreme Court. So I think the APA regime was timely for India. It perhaps could have come a couple of years earlier, but it was timely because fatigue had already started setting in. And the APA regime has delivered very good results. Internationally, bilateral APAs of India have been appreciated. India-USA relations were on top gear for most part of my 6 years as director of APA. I think it still is. The treaty partners continue to talk and resolve disputes. With other countries also, Japan, UK, and most of the Western European countries, we have excellent relationship. And along with APA, what happened, it gave renewed vigor to the MAP. We had many cases languishing in the MAP program, the mutual assistance, mutual agreement process. Now, MAP cases were not moving, but when the APA gathered a momentum of its own, we also packaged MAP with the APA cases. For example, let us say we pick up a multinational of USA, which had many years of disputes pending with the competent authority. So what we did was we tried to resolve the MAP similarly to what we used to do in the bilateral APAs. So for me, I think the third phase, which is continuing for the last 6-7 years and coincides with the APA, has been an era of maturity, perhaps a better understanding of business models, and a greater sense of trust between tax officers and taxpayers, and excellent work by tax practitioners. Because you see, the APA regime, I think 99% of the cases were with the big four consulting firms, and perhaps a very small number of cases with other entities. So the tax practitioners in these big firms, they understood APS better than perhaps some others, and they knew what kind of discussions to carry on with the tax authorities. Plus, I found the site visits to be very, very helpful, which the transfer pricing officers never did. You can't sit in your room and conclude that the business must have done this. This is the mistake. I'll make an adjustment on these lines. Site visits actually opened up our eyes. I remember doing a site visit in UK and going to the factory where the R&D used to happen. And the history of the case was every year royalty was disallowed, that there's no R&D. And what I saw in UK was mind-blowing. And I came back and gave a report that if this R&D does not get a royalty, then there is something seriously wrong with our transfer price. So you see, these kind of site visits, exposures, helped us in understanding the taxpayers' TP positioning much better. So the third phase perhaps is still continuing, and I would not be surprised to see that the fourth phase is about to emerge. Because if you are following the developments internationally, what is happening over the last few years, starting with the BEPS project and then going to the Pillar 1, Pillar 2 discussions, the recent in-principle agreement on Pillar 1, Pillar 2, all this point to one thing, that many countries and many people perhaps feel that the arm's length principle has ceded ground. It has not served its purpose. Source countries are not getting the rightful share of taxes and income. So arm's length pricing perhaps has to make way for something more mechanical, more formulaic, and where subjectivity is reduced to a minimum. That's the focus. I personally feel that to some extent it is true, especially if you look at the position that India has taken. For example, attribution of profits. India has a very strong position on this, that transfer pricing does not resolve all issues of attribution of profit. It might in many cases, but in some cases it does not, because arm's length principle or arm's length price is not something that can be equated with arm's length profit. There is nothing called arm's length profit. So how can profit attribution be carried out on the principle of arm's length pricing? Pricing, the profit is a function of demand and supply. So transfer pricing, being primarily a supply side analysis, perhaps misses out on the nitty-gritties of the demand side. And wherever that is the case, demand side needs to be given some attention. And so we just can't bind ourselves to the arm's length principle. This has been India's position. At many places, we have been misunderstood that India says that transfer pricing cannot be used at all to attribute profits. I don't think that is our position. There is a thin line. We say that transfer pricing can be the answer in many cases, but there are a select number of cases where transfer pricing provisions do not give the right answer. We need to look at some other aspects. Now, what will be the fourth phase in India? Is India ready for a massive overhaul of its transfer pricing law? I think we are. The discussions were happening. We had internal papers being prepared. But because the Pillar 1, Pillar 2 negotiations and the proposals there could not be finalized for some time, we took a pause, because we did not want to do anything in our domestic regime which would come up and then see that it's not operating very well with the new international concepts. So I think a pause has been taken. If we go to a regime of the new Pillar 1, where in many cases a formula would be used to allocate profits to developing countries, to every country, in fact, the market jurisdictions, and taxes would be enforced accordingly, the small basket of cases where transfer price would still need to be done, those are the cases where I think India is ready or would be ready to roll out a new transfer pricing regime with new rules and new regulations. One of them could be group audit and multiple year audit. Why get into an arm's length pricing determination year after year? That doesn't really make sense. You could perhaps pick up 3 to 5 years at one go, study the business case, look at the models, look at their the activities that they're conducting. What is the real deal? What is the real transaction? As the OECD says, the real deal. So then do a transfer pricing for 5 straight years instead of making them come up for audit year after year. That could be one significant change. Over the last 20 years, we also have made very significant changes. If I'm sure all of you know that we started off with the concept of arithmetic mean. Now, why was the arithmetic mean used? The argument given in 2002 or 2001 was, we don't have enough data. We don't know where to pick up the reference points. What is the third party price that would be available to us? So adopting something like a range, which was internationally accepted, would not be good for India. Let us stay with the arithmetic mean. Now, as you know, as with all measures of central tendency, arithmetic mean had its own problems. With extreme numbers, arithmetic mean could take you this way or that way. For example, if I add a software company making 75% profits, the arm's length price moves from, let us say, 15 to 25%. And that nails the case. There's a huge adjustment. Similarly, if the taxpayer were to pick up a couple of loss-making cases, the mean will pull you down to, say, 10%. So the range concept, the interquartile range, which was internationally accepted. In fact, a point to be noted is that most of our transfer pricing regulations are actually based on the OECD model. One significant departure was the adoption of arithmetic mean. Another was primacy was given to the current year's transactions, not multiple year data, but current year data. And that led to numerous disputes in our courts. So sometime in 2015 or 14, when Mr. Arun Jaitley, when the NDA government came in and Mr. Arun Jaitley was the finance minister, I think two significant announcements were made. One was adoption of the range concept, and the other was usage of multiple year data. My personal belief was, even with arithmetic mean, if you use 3 years data, a lot of disputes could be resolved. The insistence on a single year data always caused problems because cherry picking became that much easier. But if you had 3 years of data, even cherry picking would not lead to anomalous results. But what Mr. Jaitley offered to taxpayers was two significant things. Arithmetic mean is not the only way of doing it. We will, wherever there are multiple prices, we will use a data set and find the range. And we'll also use multiple year data that will soften the blow, if at all there's a blow. But you see what happened when the range concept was brought into the law. Rules had to be framed. A lot of internal discussions happened, and unfortunately, the interquartile range was rejected by a committee of experts within the department, and a very narrow range was offered. Again, the same argument was dished out that our data is not robust, we don't have enough data available. So we ended up with a very peculiar situation. We have a range which is the middle 30%. And it looks a bit obnoxious also when we internationally discuss it. What is the range used in India? 35th percentile to 65th percentile. It's a bit weird also. So we had, internal discussions, we had argued for interquartile range, but for some reason it has not been accepted. So the range is a much limited and a narrower range available to taxpayers. The middle 30, you can call them, instead of 35th to 65th. So, but I believe that the range concept has perhaps eased out the scenario at the field level. I may be corrected by people who are actually, facing transfer pricing audits and discussion with TPOs. I feel perhaps even the middle 30% is good enough to resolve a few cases which will otherwise go into adjustments and disputes. And I'm certain that the usage of multiple year data has definitely benefited while defending your arm's length pricing before the TPOs. So if we go back to the phase-wise description of our TP regime, I think phase 1, phase 2 are done and dusted with many years ago. Phase 3, I think, is almost nearing its end. Number of audits have come down. We hardly do 1,000 to 1,500 audits this year. I think the strike rate has also fallen below the 50%, which it was once upon a time. So much lesser number of audits due to various reasons. Maybe the pressure of the APA team doing things significantly differently from the TPOs. That I'm sure has an effect on the TPOs. The use of range concept and multiple data has softened the blows, reduced the number of adjustments. But as I said, the phase of maturity might have been achieved in case of simple transfer pricing, but there are complex cases which needs better understanding, perhaps more training for our IRS officers. We don't have a separate intensive transfer pricing training. We all picked up the techniques of TP while doing audits. Not a very good thing at times. You are learning while you're doing, and in the learning stage, you could err on the side of revenue, which could result in huge adjustments. That's not a very good thing. I think the department needs to focus on intensive training and on complex transfer pricing issues. For example, financial transactions. I think hardly any work has been done in India. You all perhaps must be aware of the Vodafone share issue case. It was a huge adjustment of, I think, 50,000 crore or something. Thankfully, the Bombay High Court resolved it in favor of the taxpayer, and the department was mature and wise enough not to go to the Supreme Court. We accepted the Bombay High Court verdict. Otherwise, till today, we would have been in the Supreme Court, and all share issuance cases would have been facing transfer pricing audits. I salute the then chairman CBDT, the then International Taxation BG. I was part of the loop, and I saw them how the discussions happened and how they decided not to approach the Supreme Court. I wish we had done that in some other cases, which are still in the Supreme Court. And on the basis of that, we keep on doing an adjustment, which I think is perhaps not justified. Now, somebody who's from the department, I would not be doing justice if I say that TPOs have all been wrong, TPOs have all raised unnecessary issues. They have done a wonderful job. I'll tell you why. When the TP regime started, most of the multinationals who were on cost plus models or doing simple functions in India, they said cost plus 5 is arm's length. Now, they had their own reasons for saying that. But when we looked at our own companies in India, and more or less similar profile companies, we found that something like 15 to 16% was par for the course, because the realities of business in India was different from other. If you look at the whole software industry during 2005 to 2015, I think on an average, year after year, they clocked profits of around 15 to 18%. So TPOs started, nudging the taxpayers to, increase their the profits that they were reporting. Wherever it didn't work, adjustments were carried out. And as a result, I don't know how many of you agree with me. As a result, I found that the cost plus 5 or cost plus 7 automatically transitioned to cost plus 15. It became the default starting point. Some could say because your TPOs are so aggressive, I'm reporting 15. But I felt that they also understood that if companies in India could clock 15 to 16% profits, there was no reason to report an arm's length price around 5 to 6%. So that's a significant contribution. Now, if you look at issues, the whole issue of marketing intangibles, I know it has been lambasted from all quarters that these are incidental costs, this is not international transaction. But marketing intangible as a concept is not alien to other countries. I mean, I was surprised to learn that the United States, their own transfer pricing authorities, when they look at especially the Japanese automakers, the huge automobile companies, they make huge advertisement expenses in the US. And I was surprised to know that the transfer pricing authorities in the USA also looked at these advertising expenses very carefully. They may not have made adjustments the way we have done. And our adjustments also have changed over a period of time. We started with the bright line, we moved to some profit split. I don't know today what we are doing. So our approach has changed because the bright line was frowned upon by the Delhi High Court in the famous, I think, LG case. So marketing intangibles as a concept and marketing intangibles, the way our TPOs looked at it and made adjustments, brought that issue to center stage. I don't know whether tomorrow the Supreme Court will uphold it or what judgment will come. Lots of litigation is still pending. But I can tell you that even in our MAP negotiations with the United States and UK, two strong countries, two strong treaty partners who won't yield an inch to us, in principle, we got an agreement from them that this is an international transaction. So the whole challenge that this is just a domestic transaction and incidental cannot be looked at by TPOs. I think we must appreciate that it is also being recognized by other regimes. The fact remains that we could not conclude any MAP case, or maybe we did a very few, because they were not, they said, well, it's an international transaction, you can't be making adjustments like this, the way you have done. That's not fair. So we need to look at various other aspects before making an adjustment or before resolving under MAP. But at least in principle, they agreed to the concept that this does merit a look. So I think that's a significant contribution of our TPOs, and we must not lose sight of that. So if we try to just sequentially look at our TP regime, we adopted the arm's length pricing from the arm's length principle of the OECD. Significant departure was in adoption of arithmetic mean. We moved ahead, saw huge adjustments in litigation. So the focus shifted to dispute resolution. DRP was a prime tool for that. Safe harbor regime and APAs were introduced primarily for prevention of disputes, not resolution. It is unfortunate that some APAs happen perhaps 5 years down the line. So it doesn't remain an advanced pricing as such. I wish it could be done much faster. Our average time is perhaps more than 3 years or almost touching 4 years now, which is pretty late for an APA to happen. Ideally, we should hand out an APA within 2 years of an application made. And so the focus shifted from dispute resolution to dispute prevention. The world is talking about tax certainty. The international discussions are focused around tax certainty. And I strongly believe that a strong tax regime need not prove its worth by making adjustments. I think a strong tax regime is that which uses TP regulations as an anti-abuse mechanism to make routine adjustments. It should identify and crack down on the high-risk cases where there's a systematic manipulation of intra-group pricing, and those MNEs or those groups should be made to pay their rightful taxes. But if it becomes, or as it had become in the second phase, that every second case was being picked up and some adjustments were being made, so that was not the right approach. Thankfully, we have moved away from that, and today we are in a much more mature phase of transfer pricing, at least in the simple cases. I would add that as a caveat. And if we look at significant changes within the law, I told you about the range concept and the multiplier data. There was another thing which I personally never liked, was the introduction of the transfer pricing for certain domestic transactions. I thought that was perhaps not required. It flowed from a Supreme Court judgment. But I thought, you see, transfer pricing primarily should look at preventing situations of base erosion and profit shift. Domestic transactions, one man's expenditure is another man's income, at least in most of the cases. I mean, there could be scenarios where somebody is taking profit-linked tax incentives. There could be some manipulation there. But for other transactions, I thought the whole idea of introducing SDT was not perhaps well thought out. It was perhaps done as a reaction to a directive from the Supreme Court. And as you saw, it has been slowly, diluted. Some transactions have been removed. The limits have been raised because SDT became another nuisance. And many adjustments were happening. Some of the adjustments made no sense at all. And the TPOs were again burdened with more and more cases. You cannot expect quality from an officer if you saddle him with hundreds of cases. So SDT was not actually adding to any of the qualitative aspects of transfer pricing in India. I was never personally happy or impressed with this regime and the practice. Let's see what the future holds for SDT. So I think I should stop here. I have made a mix of telling you about the phases, about some interesting developments. I would rather like to hear from the young participants if they have any specific questions or if they want any experience sharing from me on some issues. I'll try to be as candid as possible.
There's a question, sir, whether you can share your perspectives on the safe harbor rules and whether it has been able to achieve its desirable objective.
Yeah, Mukeshji, let me start. Let me tell very, very clearly, the safe harbor regime would have been a very big success. It is only us, the officers handling it, who are to be blamed. When the rules were being framed, we took an ultra conservative position. If you remember the first set of rules, cost plus 22, who the hell will come for safe harbor? I mean, the argument that was dished out now that I'm a retired guy, I'm using slightly stronger words. I would not do it otherwise. The argument that was dished out was, we are providing certainty. Certainty comes at a premium. So I remember I'd argued, but premium cannot be, you can't have such a high premium. If cost plus 15 is par for the course, 22 cannot be the right answer. I mean, so I think, unfortunately, safe harbor has not worked so far. We did try to reduce the rates when we came out with the second. The first was for 3 to 5 years. When we came for the next 5 years, we came down to 16, 17, I think 17, 18. You see, the primary thing that I argued was 90% of PP disputes in India relates to software and PPOs. Let us just plug these two loopholes. Forget the other transactions. We might still litigate, and try to get something out of the courts. But if we could have given better rates in software and BPOs, most of the small APAs would have also gone away. You see, our APA pipeline is clogged with software BPO cases. Given to me, I would sign 100 APAs in 100 days. Because these cases don't need, every case you cannot go and dig deep for and try to find some gold nuggets. These cases are straight away cost plus 15 cases. I'm willing to put a bet on that. And after digging deep for years, you do an APA at cost plus 15.5. What does it mean? It's a waste of time and resources. So I thought we could not use safe harbor rules the way we should have. Even today, it is crying out for a reduction in the rates. I think recently they have again extended it for 1 year at the same rates. There are no takers for safe harbor. And seriously, I stopped following who are going in for safe harbor. The year one, only 35 cases, whole India. So I said I'd rather look at my APs. They are giving better results. They are more mature way of doing things. So my univocal answer is safe harbor has not served the purpose. As I told about DRP, DRP has not served its purpose. Safe harbors have not served the purpose.
There's another related question, which I'll read it out. How do you see the transition from LIBOR to other reference rates and its impact on the Indian TP?
I think in the APS, what we did when we recently concluded APS, we told the taxpayer that your APA is for a period where the LIBOR would sunset, would end, and there would be another reference rate. But if I remember correctly, the CBDT has not blessed any of those new rates being discussed. I don't remember those acronyms. There are a couple of acronyms discussed that these are the rates which would become the reference points. So, but I believe that since those rates would be more or less similar to LIBOR, the transition effects would not be so serious. Because suppose we have done a case, LIBOR plus 200 basis points. Unless there's a significant departure of the new reference rate from LIBOR, I don't think our taxpayers would be seriously inconvenienced. But if I were to replace the LIBOR with Indian rates, and Indian rates of today, I mean, yesterday's rates were much, much higher. But even now, Indian rates are still pretty much above the LIBOR. And if we transition to that kind of a reference rate, I'm sure taxpayers would feel the pinch. But so far as I recollect, the discussions were that we would switch to a rate which becomes internationally acceptable and which hovers around what the LIBOR rate used to be. So I don't see any big problem in those cases.
There's another interesting question from Stuti Trivedi. Now that you have retired, what do you think would have been the most rational approach insofar as APAs are concerned?
Okay. So if we look at the Indian APA regime, we have very few cases which are complex, which relate to financial transactions, which need a lot of data analysis for doing profit splits and all that. So the majority of Indian APA cases, out of the 1,300 or 1,400 applications, at least 70% were simple, routine cost plus service providers. And I was a strong advocate that in these cases, our APA teams at the field, the commissioners and the team, perhaps could have, picked up cases in lots, cases in lots of say 5, 10 or 15, and seeing their similarities in the services being rendered and the risks being taken, sent out very brief position papers to the CBDT that these are similar cases. all of them could be perhaps concluded at cost plus 15. Now, what that would have done two things. One was those each APA need not have a 100-page position paper, because you see, our problem in the CBDT was, if I got a 100-page position paper, somebody had to read that. It cannot be that the principal chief commissioner of income tax endorses a position paper and we just ignore it and do something of our own. That was not how it was, especially in unilateral APAs, because unilateral APAs have nothing to do with the CBDT initiating negotiations with other countries. In bilateral APAs, we deviated significantly from what the field suggested and what we did, because you see, though that went into a different loop altogether. The dynamics were different. Two countries sitting across the table talking about various issues. There are, you have to give and take. It cannot be my way is the highway or the highway approach. So bilateral was a different ballgame. But in unilateral, we had to be very careful and very sensitive. Very senior officers had endorsed a particular position, and to deviate from those positions, you have to make a very pressing note in your file, because files were traveling to the revenue secretary, chairman, member. So, that took some time. Secondly, I think, and this is a very big problem for our APA program. We all can say that APA program slowed down because of COVID, but the problem lies somewhere else. COVID was an abnormal scenario. Everybody faced it. But our problem was the number of APAs that we got required perhaps twice the number of officers that we gave to this program. I mean, there's no rationale for having a large number of TPOs, but not enough officers in the APA teams. So what happened? The pipelines got clogged. The same officer had to do site visits, write a paper, discuss with his chief commissioner, then that will come to the CBDT. So that slowed down the process. And Mukesh, you remember, we started with only one commissioner. Today we have 4, but you see, the commissioner is not going to initiate all the work. Your additional commissioners still remain at the same 4. I was one of the original additional commissioners. We were 4, reporting to one Mr. Kamlesh Bashne. And today the 4 report to 4 different commissioners. That's not, the pyramid should be a pyramid. You cannot have a cylindrical structure replacing a pyramid. So I think we need to divert resources. I have made this point umpteen number of times while being in service. Even today I'm trying. Today I'm not in, I'm neither part of the government nor part of any consultancy firm. My love for the APA program and my love for my country, because I understand that ease of business also means reducing their pain points in taxation. And since my forte or my experience, forte is the wrong word to use, my experience is in the transfer pricing APA regime, and I have emotional connect with it. Even today I try to meet people senior in the government. Please do something to salvage the APA program. This is one of the finest programs of the CBDT in the last 2-3 decades, perhaps. I hope they do that. So the approach would be, Mukeshji, simpler cases should be resolved ideally within 1 year to 18 months. That can be done if you have more manpower. Complex cases, please take some time. I'm not against it. Let us sit down and discuss, understand it better. And because you see, once an APA is inked, the renewal becomes much easier. So while you spend some time on the first APA, why should the renewal need more time? Renewal, if it is on identical FAR or similar FAR, we can go ahead and do it. In fact, we did renewals in 6 months, 7 months initially. Now even renewals have gone for a toss, I'm told. Maybe because of COVID, but again, because of the serious shortage of manpower in our APA program.
I just want to add something here, Mukesh. I don't know if you remember, I had brought out this point in the Pacific Rim Tax Conference. So just to add to Mr. Sobhan.
I think I can see Soma.
Both India and the US received about 100.
Seema, we are losing you, I think.
Seema, we are losing you. I think you're...
people in their APA team. And how many did India have? India had 13 officers and 13 CBDT officers and 16 in the income tax department. So, I mean, it's one thing to say that we are not resolving our cases, but I think this point about not having adequate manpower is very, very fair and should be taken up on priority.
And Seema, the US is still hiring.
Yeah.
I recently spoke to one of the APMA senior guys. He said, we are still hiring. And he said, why are you not doing so? I said, sorry, I'm now out of this. Don't blame me for it now. So Yeah, it becomes frustrating for treaty partners. In a
Yeah.
bilateral APA, their position paper comes to me in 6 months. And even after 2 years, I'm unable to respond because you see, the problem is, of course, I also suggested that for the bilateral APAs, let us do it ourselves within the board. I know it was not easy because even the CBDT was hard pressed for resources, but I said, at least to avoid international embarrassment where we are unable to respond to a position paper, let us work on the case and send a small position paper outlining our views. That was not accepted because they said, no, we have commissioners working on the case. So again, I was not convinced. But on many things, I was overruled, and rightly so. The senior people had every right to overrule me, but I always thought I should make a point that whatever we do, the approach is to make the APA program better, more efficient, and more responsive. It is such a wonderful program. Why waste it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, Mukesh, you were saying something.
So you had posted some more questions. I thought, would you like to?
Yes. Yes, so I actually had 3 questions for Mr. Sovankar. One is, coming back to that instruction. In that instruction where they said that the AO cannot really make a TP adjustment. So could the AO's power really have been curtailed just by virtue of an instruction? I mean, it is a power that was given to the AO through the statute, right? So I don't know if really, so it's one thing to say it's an instruction and it's binding on the officer, but really, it also at the same time took away something that the statute had given. So I'm not sure how that dynamic works. So that was one question I had. The second question.
Let me answer one by one. Otherwise, I'll forget the question.
Okay.
So you are right. Ideally, we could have rewritten the transfer pricing sections. But for that, there's a process. The finance bill, lots of discussions. Here, we had a member at that time, I would not like to name him now. He wanted that, it's high time, whatever the board could do without going to the parliament, let us do so as to make the TP regime more palatable. I'm not saying it's a perfect instruction, but at least it did a few things which I think taxpayers appreciated. So, and as you rightly said, the instruction flowed from section 119. So it's not that we violated the act as such. Using section 119, we came out with instructions. And again, nothing adversarial to the taxpayer. So if you look at transfer pricing, an adjustment made by the AO in a way is adversarial to the taxpayer because the taxpayer feels he has done a very decent job by his arm's length pricing is perfect. So by restrict the AO, we did two things. One is frivolous adjustments due to lack of understanding of TP provisions, or there were cases where cases were not being referred to TPOs because the AO wanted to do the adjustment. There were some such scenarios also. We wanted to put a full stop there. We said, no, it's not your job. Whatever the TPO does, and the law clearly says TPO, the AO has to pass an order in conformity with the TPO's order. He cannot tinker around with it. So if I again allow the AO to do an assessment of transfer pricing, that creates a parallel regime, another point where there would have been disputes and all. So while ideally perhaps the law needed to be amended, I don't think there is any legal infirmity by using instruction which flowed from section 119 to prevent the AOs from doing a TP order.
So the other question which I had was, when you spoke about the specified domestic transactions and their proprietary, given that, they are both transactions that are happening in India, if we were to, extend this analogy to the AMP transactions and then say that these are also transactions that happen in India, and then maybe the right point to test is if the distribution contract is either getting terminated or the brand is genuinely getting sold. So wouldn't that have been a better touch point to test the AMP transaction rather than, this creation?
Yeah, I agree with you. We have had numerous discussions on AMP and how to evaluate the transactions. And I certainly take the point that at the end of the day, I mean, while we can still question it from the transfer pricing angle, at the end of the day, these are transactions within India. So the question of base erosion and profit shifting is perhaps not there. But I mean, while my general principle, what I said about SDT, could also be, used in saying that AMP transactions are not very dissimilar. AMP transactions had many more nuances, the price of import, whether there was a specific contract or implicit understanding of how much to spend on advertising. Those are decisions which perhaps had the control of the group, whereas specific domestic transactions may not have that, to that extent. But it would not be correct for me to say what exactly is the single point answer to AMP transactions. There could be various ways of doing it. In fact, if you ask me today, even today, I feel that no one ever said that the bright line test was a transfer pricing method. None of the, even I was a TPO briefly. I also used Brightline. We never used Brightline as a method. Brightline was a tool that assisted me in determining the arm's length price. But I think that after the judgment came, everybody said Delhi High Court bars use of Brightline method because that's not a recognized method. So anyway, I think your point is taken, but the answer to AMP still lies far in the right. We don't have a correct, right, single answer even today.
Fair enough. And so my last question was, we have this safe harbor rates, and I couldn't agree more with you. I just really wish that India had done a lot more with our safe harbor rates. I think at least 60 to 70% of these senseless disputes among computation of margins and comparable companies would have all gone, and everybody would have focused on the real issues. But be that as it may, now the safe harbor rates is one bucket. What we agree in APA is one bucket, and then there is the bilateral, you have it in map level, it's actually the bilateral APA more, which is the third bucket. So how does the CBDT reconcile, the variations that we see in the cost plus that is agreed? So isn't it like unfair when you give an APA at 15% when the safe harbor is 17%, and then the bilateral is sometimes 14%?
Yeah. No, so this internal challenge comes up in every case, and the first person who faces this challenge is the CCIT, principal CCIT, because the TP regime is administered by him. TPOs are still, I think, going cost plus 22, 24 even today. Whereas the APA team, which reports to the same CC, proposes, let us say, cost plus 18, and safe harbor is another rate. So this internal wrangling is always there. But you see, my problem was different. My problem was, if you fix the safe harbor rates at a higher rate, then the persuasive value of that safe harbor rate, it trickles down to the TPO, it trickles down to the AP officers also. Now, if I'm convinced it's a cost plus 14, I should have the courage to say so on file and say, let us do it. But if I'm constantly worried, and you see the political economy under which the Indian bureaucrat operates is very, very difficult. Let me tell you, motives are ascribed immediately, allegations are made left, right, and center. It's not the same. See, let us look at APMA in the US. One officer there, if he's convinced it's a cost plus, so let us look at from the US perspective. If they would always say cost plus 12 is arm's length, but let us say somebody is convinced that this is one case in India where the functions are very complex. Cost plus 16 should be awarded to the Indian entity. If he says that and he convinces his team, nobody is going to question. Whereas if you come here and anything that is done in good faith is questioned, it becomes difficult. And this is for the entire Indian bureaucracy, perhaps the Indian society. We say a lot of goody things, but at the end of the day, we don't trust each other. And in my personal effort, I always try to create trust with the taxpayers. My simple goal was, if they can't trust me, then how can we have an agreement? Advanced pricing agreement cannot be done without trust. So, and I think many officers in the APA did that. We have some great officers who have led the APA program. Mr. Akhilesh Ranjan was one such person, Mr. Sahai. They gave tremendous leadership, Pragya Madam, who's now in the board. So all the officers who worked in APA tried to build this trust. I think at least most of them, if not everyone. And that is why I call this the most powerful program of CBDT, because every other program pits the taxpayer against the tax officer. This was one program which perhaps brought them together on many issues. So that constant struggle is there, and that is why I plead for safe harbor rates to be more in sync with reality.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, Mukesh.
Siva, you would like to close it?
Sure. I want to take one question in the closing, which somebody's posted here, which says, so many good officers like you are leaving the department and we need more people like you. What can the government do to stop this situation? You just
No, no. In fact, I don't know how to answer this. Thank you for at least putting me in the good officers category. No, so I will tell the questioner, the person who put the question, that when I left, somebody asked me, "Are you fed up with the department?" I said, "No, I love this department. So this department has given me an opportunity to learn transfer pricing, to work in APA, visit OECD and other forums as an Indian delegate. I could not have asked for more. So I had no complaints at all with the department. It is purely a personal decision, and many people are leaving the department for various reasons, you know. And the civil services, the UPSC, they select wonderful candidates year after year, and I'm sure the government would continue to find brilliant officers who would do justice, at least in the taxation era, in the taxation regime, justice to the taxpayer, be fair, and I think we would not have a dearth of good officers.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we've overshot our time and
Sorry.
no, not at all. I mean, it's your time really. We'll all be happily listening for another hour. But I think we'll wrap up now. Thank you very, very much for your time, sir. It's been wonderful and extremely enjoyable. And we hope to have you soon back.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be doing this for you. Anytime I'm available.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shobhanji. Thanks, Seema.
Thank you, Mukesh ji. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mukesh. Thanks,
Thank
Michelle.
you.
Thanks, man. Bye. Bye, everyone. Thank you.